Many species across the animal kingdom aggregate during their mating seasons in communal displays. This phenomenon is puzzling and interesting because it seems to present many challenges to the choosers, typically the females, who have to discriminate calls against background noise, discriminate features of calls that are interfering in overlapping with each other. They have to localize signals that could be quite spatially dense, and all of this might attract predators. The chorus we're going to look at today is Hyloversicolor, the eastern gray tree frog. Mate choice here is mediated almost entirely by acoustic features and essentially temporal call length and call rate. Males perch non-randomly and highly variable density around a chorus. We see among the approaching females something of a best of in strategy. They'll find a group, listen and compare, and then pick their favorite. They're not sequentially sampling male after male and then returning. So because mate choice takes place at a very small spatial scale in this species, we're going to set up a very, very simple imbalance of one call versus three calls, place females in the center, and see how they respond. We can quickly find out if there is a strong or weak initial preference for signal clusters, and then by playing around with call features in the lone call and the clustered calls, we can see how robust that cluster preference is to preferences for call traits. So these experiments that I'm about to show you are going to play around with three different synthetic Hyloversicolor calls. The population mean is modeled off the average call in the wild, which is a pulsatile trill that is a little less than a second long, produced roughly every 6 seconds. We then have two others, an attractive call that has been manipulated to be 20% longer and faster, and an unattractive, which is 20% shorter and slower. So we'll have a pretty straightforward experimental design for this first question: how much does clustering signals make a difference in female choice? So if we were to release a female in the center of one of these arenas, for example, the one at the bottom, a mean versus a mean, we would of course expect to see 50-50 preference. We could pretty straightforwardly ask the question there, M versus 3 M's, how much does tripling the number of signals on one side of the arena affect choice? Now we can make things a little more interesting by boosting the attractiveness of... And for good measure, we will reduce the attractiveness of the cluster to unattractive, so 3 uglies versus 1 attractive. So, as I said, we expected 50-50 in the mean versus mean control trial, and that's exactly what we saw here. Proportion of females there, 0.5 being the null, no preference. In the 1 mean versus 3 means, however, we see obviously an overwhelming preference for those clustered males. In a two-speaker comparison of attractive versus mean, of course, we see the expected attractive preference. However, that preference reverses when it is an attractive lone versus 3 means. When the stakes are attractive versus ugly, of course, there's an attractive preference in the two-speaker. But in the 4-speaker, we actually have no preference. A lone attractive call is responded to much as is a trio of ugly calls. All right, they like clusters. That doesn't mean that there's nothing interesting and sophisticated happening here with regard to female choice behaviors, because what are they doing once they get there? So using this same 1 versus 3 design, we're going to take a look in a little more detail about what females do when the call features within the cluster that they like so much varies. So of course we still have our 1 M versus 3 M's, but now we can boost the central call in that cluster to an attractive. And for good measure, really maximize the magnitude of difference between the calls within that cluster, make the two flanking left and right signals there unattractive. Unlike in the previous results, we are not simply pooling the single responses of, say, 20 or 21 females. We are looking at some pretty fine-scale preferences here. There's 4 speakers, sometimes 3 different call features out there. The preferences may vary from female to female. It may be the case that many will not do anything consistently interesting. So here we're interested in tallying the number of females that pass this 4 out of 5 criterion, and then we're interested in classifying them by what it was that they preferred repeatedly. So what you see here, the gray bars are just the quote-unquote performance of the simulation. This is what totally random females will do by chance. Because the flanking signals are always going to be the same, we're not really interested in which of the two they pick. So basically there's a 0.5 chance in every choice event. About 4 out of 21 females will get lucky and pass my criterion. And then you see the bars for the 0.25 likelihood. The lone and the center means there are very low. Simulation will produce a consistent female for these choice patterns between 0 and 1 time. All right, now you can see the observed data here. The comparison that we're interested in is simply the black versus the gray. The abundance of females that passed the test with regard to lone preference, either of the flanking preferences or center preference, is not different from chance. What's noteworthy here is that there is no central preference or side bias for the approaches to the cluster. However, when we boost the attractiveness of that central speaker, now the females start to beat the performance of that simulation. Then we had 6 out of 21 consistently approaching the cluster, specifically toward that middle. When the magnitude of difference within the cluster was largest, attractive versus some flanking unattractive speakers, we again saw almost half of our females, 9 out of 21, consistently approach the middle, but we saw a non-significant number just so happened to reach 4 out of 5 for one of the unattractives. So they approach clusters, but once they get there, a lot of the behavior is very, very much non-random. What does this mean about how female choice operates in these frog courses? Clearly there's spatial preference, but it does not fully negate the call feature preferences that we know exist for the length of calls and the rate of calls. Instead, what we think is going on is there's a two-step mate sampling heuristic here. First, females simply orient towards clusters, towards subgroups within a chorus, and then they enact fine-scale call feature discrimination. Now, this, of course, has some implications for male mating strategies. And what our findings indicate is that it would behoove males to set up shop near literally any other competitor. Provided that he does that, he will be rewarded for investing in the energy of his display. Thanks for listening.